Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. We are going to get started with the webinar in just a couple minutes. Please stay tuned. Okay, we're going to get started now. So thanks everyone for joining. This is Jim Crook with CTERA Marketing. Really happy to welcome you to a webinar with CTERA and Varonis. We're going to be talking about our new partnership, our new integration between our platforms, and how we're enabling organizations to protect files from edge to cloud. And so I'm really pleased to be joined today by today's speakers. We have Simon Michelson, Field CTO for North America at CTERA. And we're also joined from the Varonis side, Killian Engler, who is the Technical Marketing Manager at Varonis. So, gentlemen, thanks so much for joining today. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to everybody.
Great. Thanks, Killian. So just real quick, we're going to be going over a few things today on the agenda side. But I think the main thing to call out before we do get started is if you have any questions that you'd like to have answered on the webinar today, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end, and you can feel free to type your questions into the Q&A button there at the bottom of your screen. I think we're all veterans of Zoom webinars now, so it should be fairly simple for you to do that. Any questions that we don't get to at the end of today, we will follow up with you separately offline. But we'll do that at the end. Before we get to there, we're gonna talk through sort of the industry situation today for a lot of organizations, and really where organizations and users are accessing files and sharing and creating files all across a number of different edge locations in what has become a very distributed post-pandemic era, we would say. We'll talk about the CTERA Varonis, what we do, and really how our platforms are really very nicely integrated, and the very nice synergies that we have between our two platforms and our technologies. Killian is going to offer a live demo as well, so you'll get to see you'll get a chance to see the platform in action. And then, like I said, we'll wrap that up with a little Q&A toward the end. So that's it for my end for now. Simon, I'm going to hand it over to you, and we'll get started.
Excellent, thank you, Jim. Really, just to kind of kick it off and present, where we stand in terms of the market, and as organizations continue on to deploy critical business applications, what we're seeing is that today's infrastructure supporting the modern organizations is everywhere. We have our applications, our storage, different kinds of stacks deployed into different types of environments. That could be across our core data centers, that could be across edge devices, whether these are users working from home, from branch offices, or using their phones while they're traveling, as well as cloud. We see incredible adoption among enterprise as well as federal for cloud enablement, cloud presenting opportunities to improve on performance and scalability. And as a result, IT is required to be able to deploy and manage infrastructure in such a distributed manner. And needless to say, that creates complexity. But inevitably, what we're seeing is that every environment like that is going to be hybrid. It's going to have some sort of a mix between those, three types of clusters. As part of this, deployment model, we also see an increase in terms of how much data is being generated at the edge, as we've kind of shifted the post-pandemic era to kind of a hybrid way of working from home. But that also started before with introductions of new devices and capabilities that allowed users and applications to generate a lot more data than before. And as a result of that, we also seeing quite a bit of application developers where they're essentially dictating where their storage or infrastructure is going to live. Whether that's a new app that's going to be introduced in the cloud, in the core data center, or running on a user's laptop, that might dictate, where that, IT stack is going to live from a security standpoint, network storage, and so on. And then kind of focusing on today's aspect, and of course, CTERA and Varonis is storage and the presentation of file data has to live everywhere. We have a need for accessing data and protecting data across all those different types of infrastructure options that we have. So with that in mind, we kind of look at the industry landscape and where is that going to head in the upcoming years. And currently forecasted that all the way until 2025 is that the amount of edge devices and storage applications driven by edge apps is going to increase over time. As you can see, as about 30x increase and estimated until 2025 that edge workloads are going to be more and more dominant. Now, edge in this sense is not the same type of edge that we defined 20 years ago. Edge is going to be introduced as an extension of a core data center or a cloud or any type of hosting center, where the edge is essentially a function that is providing a certain business value to a user or to an office, but as a result, it's producing data. It needs to be secured. It needs to be managed. So we're going to see a lot more of that growing over the upcoming years. Now, by extending our reach and expanding the types of edge applications that we have onto, to our users and offices and rolling out applications globally, we're inevitably creating distance between where that application or user resides and where the actual data storage system is. And when we have that distance from a technology standpoint, that presents challenges. And if we kind of look into CTERA's focus is specifically as you look at unstructured data workloads, and how do you present distributed storage across possibly hundreds of thousands of users or tens of thousands of remote sites, where there's a need for local storage capacity for a certain application or a user or group of people to work in. That presents capacity challenges, right? Imagine having to go onto a remote site and having to expand a storage array. That could be a data protection issue with not having enough bandwidth to keep up with that backup windows all the way back to our core data center or to the cloud. But then also present some security challenges around it. How do we secure those edge devices from any type of attack, whether that's phishing that may cause ransomware later, and we're seeing a lot more of those instances happening, permission issues, but these are all things we're used to. I think as an IT engineers and administrators, as we look at running a distributed system that has multiple instances, that could create some management and difficulties that overall impact the productivity of our users. So when we kind of look into all those challenges, one of the ones we wanted to kind of focus on this discussion is data security challenges. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Killian to kind of give us a high-level overview of what those challenges are.
That's great. Thanks so much, Simon. And I think you really set it up perfectly. We have more data and it's continually growing, and people have the need to access it from anywhere, all over the world at any time. And what we've seen is even in the good old days, and I'm using air quotes, where we just had data on-prem in small data sets, there were a lot of really challenging security questions that people asked. One of the first ones is really, is my data at risk? Oop, I think it went through. There we go. Just really trying to understand what the risk profile of the data looks like. One of the key components to that is just finding the data that we need to deal with and being able to do it quickly and accurately. But it's not just about finding data. The day before, maybe you start off the process, you don't know where your sensitive data lives, so you have one problem. I need to find it. Once you've gone ahead and found it, then you have hundreds of thousands or millions of problems because that data could be anywhere, and users are continually creating more of it. So we need to start to answer the question, is that exposed, and prioritizing the risk that we face around this data. And of course, once we've found it, once we've decided what the risk profile looks like, how do we take proactive steps to reduce that risk? And here's the key, without breaking business process. Now, on the other side of that, in terms of a lot of the concerns, even the last couple of years, but especially in the last several months where the ransomware scourge has really hammered a lot of businesses, is can I detect a breach? And not only can I detect a breach, how quickly can I detect it, and how quickly can I respond to it? So the time to detection and time to response are absolutely paramount as we're facing these larger nation-state attackers or organized threat actor groups. And that really comes down to understanding what people are doing with the data they have access to, especially with remote workers expected to be able to access data anywhere at any time. How are they getting access to it, where from, and what are they doing with it? And looking at all of that access activity, am I able to separate out the really important, the needle from the needle sack, I guess you will, being able to detect the advanced, sophisticated attackers who go out of their way to really try and hide in that noise. And of course, once we detect something, we need to be able to investigate it quickly and bring that to a close. So it's not just about getting that alert, it's having all the right context in place to make sense out of it and take action quickly. And then I always like to think of compliance as sort of the intersection between these two concepts. Really, a lot of the compliance mandates fall between both of these, understanding who has access to the regulated data that's stored, why, being able to understand how and why they're using it to make sure that the usage is appropriate for the reasons that it was collected, and of course, getting that information to the right people in the business to make sense out of it, make determinations, and then of course, being able to prove that these steps were taken to secure the data appropriately, and be that GDPR, CCPA, in terms of the bigger mandates and all the new ones coming down, or even things that are not official regulations, but like a zero trust model, which is recommended by a lot of organizations, Microsoft and the NSA after the wake of a number of these breaches, being able to prove that you've taken that seriously and implementing those processes. And I'll turn it back over to you, Simon. Those are kind of just setting the groundwork for the problems that organizations face even more and more, especially as this data grows.
That's excellent, and thank you, Killian. And and as we kind of look into look at that a little bit deeper, is our approach, together towards data management and data security. instead of looking from the outside in, we're looking at it from the inside out. If we look at headquarters, that could be our representative of our core data centers, our cloud deployments, or any other facility where we have our stacks running in. And as we look at that component, and then we want to extend or expand that storage onto remote sites. By using this approach of inside out, we have essentially more control over management procedures, over security, and overall on capacity and performance. Essentially, if we take a look at headquarters as our authoritative copy for our global file system, our namespace, where we have a full copy of our data sets, and then each branch office or home office essentially is a cached presentation of that same data. By doing so, we create a namespace that can be accessed from anywhere. So that first and foremost addresses that accessibility issue that we've identified before. We could stream software updates and policies centrally from headquarters that will propagate and be published onto any instance of CTERA running in your branch office or home office. That provides more control for IT. And then essentially with this architecture, we're providing a headquarter grade experience, if you will. By using that cache presentation of the data, we solve a lot of those performance challenges that users were complaining about as they started to work from home, or previously where they had to remote into headquarters to grab a file or a folder. With this approach, we have the intelligence to say what data is active and make sure that that data is always close to where the user resides. And at the same time, on the other side of this is when data is marked as stale, that hasn't been accessed for a significant amount of time, we have the ability to reclaim that storage capacity and making sure that that edge device never runs out of capacity virtually. So they can still, those applications or users can still write and generate new data without running of capacity, and it's going to keep expanding our bucket that we have in headquarters. With this ability, again, we have not only an opportunity to improve upon our management processes and procedures, and overall reduce the amount of IT that's required at a remote site, but it also presents a massive financial improvement in terms of the expenditures of having to manage this type of distributed storage system. So with the global file system, you're reducing the amount of capacity that is required out in an edge location. You're improving the management overhead, but then with deduplication techniques and the ability to leverage object storage and what can I say, lower tier types of storage solutions, you gain the capacity and while not compromising on performance and security. So as we kind of look into the architecture in more detail and this type of inside out approach that I was presenting earlier, we essentially do this with 100% software. So CTERA's file storage platform or global file system is fully enabled with 100% software that can be deployed on any hypervisor or cloud environment. And essentially is comprised of two main components. The global file system, what we call is the mothership, that is the global namespace, horizontally scalable file system that can be deployed in any core data center or cloud provider. And then we extend access over traditional native protocols such as CIFS, NFS, or even clients that are running on users' laptops or servers using endpoints. And these endpoints are CTERA edge filers that you can see at the bottom. These act as like-for-like replacement for Windows file systems, NetApp filers, so on and so forth, and present a compatible NTFS file system where users can store and read data. Now, the key difference here is that these filers and CTERA drive endpoints have the intelligence of, again, caching the most frequently used data and then reclaiming capacity when data becomes stale. By doing so, with this method, not only we gain those storage efficiencies, but we also improve upon are DR and business continuity operations, because data is accessible from anywhere. This is one of the core characteristics of a global file system. And as a result, whenever you have a site that becomes unavailable, users can always access their data sets through another site, or directly from an instance that's running in the cloud. So that highly available file access is really what enables that type of any user, any site, any cloud with 100% security wrapped around it with this software-defined solution. Now, as kind of our topic for discussion today, we've partnered with Varonis to really complement the security capabilities of our platform. If you look at CTERA as a data management platform, the ability to aggregate massive amounts of data sets and really create a contiguous namespace across hundreds and thousands of endpoints, security is a challenge, especially as you're running such a distributed environment. So CTERA is fully enabled with collecting all the audit information for what users are actually doing on a day-to-day. What files are being read, what files are being changed, what permissions are being updated. All these events are being captured by our platform and then kept and can be forwarded onto Varonis. And then the other aspect of this, as you're starting to manage, hundreds of terabytes or even multiple petabytes, you also can be quite concerned with compliance and compliance around, is my permission structure working correctly? Am I storing sensitive data on certain systems? So that type of classification, these are all extensions or that would complement CTERA by integrating a solution such as Varonis. So as you can see here in this dashboard, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over back to Killian, that he's going to walk us through, in more detail, the aspects of the integration between CTERA and Varonis and the Varonis platform as a whole. So Killian, over to you.
Thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and request remote control so I can advance the slides. If not, I'll ask you to do it.
Please.
There we go. Thank you. So if we look at, again, the growing data and the number of challenges that organizations face storing so much sensitive data and facing the threat of advanced actors and ransomware groups, in order to address these key use cases that I talked about a little bit earlier, we need to collect certain pieces of information. So in most organizations, of course, they'll have the CTERA data storage there and the edge filers accessible to the users. And businesses might have additional platforms as well too. I think a lot of folks have been going to 365 and leveraging Teams. So these are places where we can collect data, as well as some of the perimeter telemetry if they're VPNing into the organization, operating inside of there and then going back out again. And then of course, directory services underpinning all of these. So these are the data stores that Varonis looks at and monitors. And what we do is we collect a couple key pieces of information from these platforms in order to make sense out of really the data that's stored there and then address these use cases. First and foremost, we want to start with the users and groups. We need to know who's out in the environment and what their relationship is. Once we really know who's at play and what the players are, the next thing we want to do is content classification. We understand what users are in the environment. We need to know what types of data is stored there. Is it sensitive? Is it regulated? What do we need to worry about specifically? Once we know the users out there, once we know the content classification, the next thing is understanding the permissions. And this gives us a lot of important context. We know who the users are. We know then with the permissions, what data they can get access to and how, what they can do with it, so what level of rights they have. And we can also use that to prioritize risk. If there's sensitive data in locations that are exposed to everyone in the organization or too many people, that helps us really prioritize that risk. Next up, we want to understand then how the users are accessing data that they have access to. So we can start to figure out what looks normal or usual. And on the other side, detect what is unusual, abnormal, so we can alert when things go wrong and quickly move to that detection phase and the response phase. And then, of course, going along with this too, because people are expected to work from anywhere at any time on any device, we need to collect the perimeter telemetry as well. So understand where they're coming in from, where they're going out to, and what they're doing inside of the organization. And then joining that together with the AD telemetry, we can start to enrich the access activity and the telemetry and access information to understand what devices people are using, where are they logging in to, and then what resources are they accessing. So with all of these pieces of information together, we can start to address those core use cases I talked about, and of course, take action to reduce that risk and respond to threats faster. There we go. The transition's a little bit slow. So I talk a lot about responding to the threats that we see. So Varonis collects audit information from all of those platforms we just looked at. So your on-prem resources, your CTERA resources, Windows servers if you still have them, directory services, 365. We bring all of the audit information together, in addition to the authentication events from AD, DNS information internally, and then of course, web connections as well. We do this, of course, without using endpoint agents. So we're not on the endpoint. We collect all of this information unobtrusively, but we're not just making copies of logs. This isn't just raw data that we're throwing somewhere. What we do is we collect just the key pieces of information that we need to make sense out of the events. So the user, the file, the location, and some telemetry information. But then, and this is some of the secret sauce, we enrich that with other pieces of metadata from our platform. So we're actually creating metadata streams that didn't exist. When we're dealing with a particular user, we'll learn their role. So we'll learn if they're an executive or an admin or a service account, because each one of these types of accounts behaves differently. So this is key to being able to detect odd or unusual behavior. We know, of course, the file being accessed, but we enrich that with content classification. This will change the risk profile of data access. If it's odd or unusual, that would be alert, but if it's odd or unusual access on sensitive data, that is a much bigger potential threat. We also enrich the telemetry we have around the users and the devices. So we figure out what the device name is associated with the IP address. IP addresses, of course, can change. So we want to make sure that we can tie that to a definitive device, and then start baselining and pairing users with devices so we know when users start accessing things in unusual ways or logging devices they typically don't. And then, of course, with our remote work, we want to make sure that we understand the geolocation and figure out where people typically work from so we can spot signs when things are different or go wrong. And not only that, we need all of this information so we can figure out, of course, what looks normal. You know, David here, he's an executive and he typically works from his device and he's based in the US. These are all normal things that we'll learn over time. And in this case, David might have access to sensitive data, but most of the time he doesn't use it. However, understanding what those normal profiles look like is really key to being able to spot when things change and alert on those events as quickly as possible. So if David's account gets taken over by an outside attacker and he starts accessing the VPN from a different location that's unusual, if he starts accessing data in ways that are different than he typically behaves and unlike his peers, that's another signal that we can send out to act quicker to detect threats in progress and stop them. And of course, I thought there was one more slide, but there's not. But we need to bring all of those pieces of information together into one place so we have the context necessary to investigate this quickly. So when there's an alert, we need to make sure that we empower the threat responder to have all the information he needs at the tips of his fingers to make sense out of it and act quickly. And Simon, I'll turn this back over to you. Of course, we can do this together with CTERA in terms of bringing this information together and providing it to our customers at the tips of their fingers.
Thank you, Killian. So I wanted also to take the audience through, maybe a little bit on the specifics of how an integration between Varonis and CTERA would work. So really, we integrate on two main fronts. One is on log collection, audit log collection, and analysis. So for that type of workflow and procedure, the CTERA filers, as you can see them span across headquarters, branch 1 and 2, they actively collect this audit information as users continue to access files or change permissions, so on and so forth. That is, of course, for any operation that's done over a map drive. Now, once they store all that audit log locally, they then ship it onto a component of CTERA that's called the CTERA log forwarder that you can see at the bottom portion with the purple rectangle. The log forwarder's responsibility is to collect all the logs, audit logs that are captured by the individual CTERA filers, and then relay them over to the Varonis platform for analysis. Later on, all those logs can be also shipped onto a log management system such as Splunk for long-term retention and so on and so forth. But this is one aspect that could drive insight, is understanding what users are doing, trying to identify anomalies, and trying to mitigate any potential security concern as a result. That type of procedure is facilitated through a protocol that we used to integrate with Varonis called RabbitMQ. This is the messaging service that we use to exchange all of this audit information between CTERA and Varonis. Now, the other path or other workflow where the Varonis platform is integrated with CTERA is around data classification. And that is specifically surrounding compliance workloads where you have certain data sets that might be sensitive, or you're looking to understand if there's perhaps certain data sets that are not being protected in the right measures, if you will. And those data sets, as part of CTERA's global file system, can be distributed. You can have copies of that data set residing across headquarters, branch 1 and 2, because the global file system provide that, ubiquitous access model. So for data classification, we've integrated with the Varonis collector, and that you can see the Varonis collector is one of the components in this architecture that it can access the CTERA filer and essentially perform a scan of all the contents that are stored on the CTERA global file system. That is, of course, an incremental forever scan. It has no need to kind of rescan the contents all the way back from the beginning. It's smart enough to continue on from only to process those changes from the most recent days or so, and provide that classification. Now, typically, one of the questions we get asked is that where that centralized scanning point is going to be deployed. Needless to say, the collector service has the ability to scan any CTERA filer, but if you're deploying an architecture that might leverage a core data center or a cloud provider, you might be concerned with some egress charges, especially if your data set is pretty large in the multi-petabyte range, and that can result in some data recalls, because since the CTERA filers act as caching appliances, not the entire data set might exist locally, and that a retrieval of that data might result in cloud egress costs. So we want to minimize costs, but at the same time, get the benefit of that data classification. So the way we do that is through CTERA filers that are running in the cloud. So CTERA has not only filers that can run on any hypervisor environment across ESX, KVM, and Hyper-V, but also filers that can run as instances, EC2 instances in Amazon, of course, virtual machines in Azure, and of course in Google and other cloud providers. Those filers act as any other on-premise filer, and they can present SMB for the entirety of the data set onto the Varonis collector. With this approach, all the traffic, all the scanning is done in the cloud, and we're not exporting data outside of it, and as a result, we're avoiding those egress costs. So these are the two paths, if you will, two capabilities that are enabled as part of this integration and partnership with Varonis around audit log analysis and discovery, as well as data classification. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over for a live demonstration of this capability. Killian, back to you.
Thanks so much, I appreciate it. Let's go ahead and share out my demo. Here we go. Can everyone see my demo? Hopefully.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks so much. That was a great setup and great introduction. So where I'd like to start in this demonstration is where a lot of our customers will start, and that's in the Varonis web interface. In this case, I'm focused right now on our alert dashboard. This is really the threat detection and response capabilities section. This is where you do some of that threat hunting and responding when something happens. And it's broken down into a couple different sections. Along the top, we have our alerts over time. So this gives you a picture of sort of the health of the environment, the alerts that we're seeing. Then we give you some key pieces of information. So the top alerted device, the devices most alerted in this case, top alerted users. So a stack ranked list of users, and they're also color coded, even though they're all red here. These are all high threat alerts. So these are the most active users triggering alerts. And then of course, our top threat model. So these are the actual individual alert names that have triggered. Now, for any one of these, I can drill down and get more information. If I wanted to see the alerts associated with this particular device, I can simply add that to my search. But I see my backup service account here. Kind of weird that a backup account has a lot of alerts associated with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that one to my search. My internet connection is a little bit slow, so all of my clicks take an extra second. So by adding that backup service to my search, what it's going to do is show me all of the alerts that I have over time associated with this account. So what we're doing is we're looking at the backup service account over the last 7 days. So in this case, we've collected all of the details and all of the platforms that we have here together into one place. And we can see here that the device associated with this account is a little bit odd. We saw this ERIC PC on the previous screen as top alerted. So that makes sense. Something really weird is going on here. But when we start to look at these things together in context, we can see that the service account has logged on to a personal device for the first time. So this service account is logging on to an end user device that it typically doesn't, which is definitely odd or weird. Then once it's done that, it's begin accessing file data that it doesn't typically access and sensitive file data that it doesn't typically access. And after all of those things, it's accessed the internet and then went to an email website to exfiltrate data. So this is definitely, in a very quick view, a sign that something has gone terribly wrong, that this account was probably compromised by an attacker. Now, if I want to dive into any one of these, I can look at the alert details, for example, and it'll give me all the context that I need to make sense out of this particular alert. And we'll give it a second. There we go. Apologize for my slow internet. So what we can see here is a little description. In this case, the backup service accessed a file it doesn't typically access. In this case, it wasn't changed and it wasn't on a watch list prior to that, but we have the context that was associated with other alerts. We knew that from the previous screen. And in this case, this account has accessed a device that doesn't typically access, and it's accessed data that it doesn't typically access over the period of time that we've been looking at it here. So we bring all the context together into one place, start to make sense out of this. And if I wanted to, I can drill down on the particular user or the event or the data involved in this alert as well. And I could do this for all of these different types of alerts. So if we're starting to connect the dots between this kill chain, these are places along the entire kill chain, really, that we can stop this bad action. The quicker we can detect it, the quicker we can stop it. And I mentioned we can, of course, drill down into any of this information. So I could drill down, jump into there, but I have my event section up right here too. Behind the scenes, we're collecting all of the event information from all the places that we're monitoring. So the CTERA file servers, or actually edge filers, excuse me, the other Windows servers, 365, the perimeter telemetry, as well as Active Directory. We're bringing those all together into one place and providing deep level of insights into what's happening. So we can filter down on just alerted events here or events on sensitive data. And this is all dynamic, searchable, and sortable. So I can really drill down and see very quickly who's accessed what, how, and why in all of these cases. By simply clicking on any of these different insights, I can filter it down and find that needle in the needle stack in this case. So jumping back over to the alerts, for example, if I want to see just the events associated with this particular file access, what I can say is just show me the alerted data, and it will take me right to the query that I need. And I can see here, I usually go into my list view. I can see just what was accessed as part of this particular event. So here it was on my CTERA file server. Here are all the locations. And of course, I can see all of the relevant details in terms of the file access. It was accessed, here's the file name. It was accessed from eRPC, the time, the client IP address, what happened, and of course, it was part of an alert. And I can continue to search and sort and refine this information down even further, or use it to pivot, for example, by clicking on any of these different search criteria to really do that threat hunting investigation. So that was an example of how we can detect threats across the entire landscape and take action quickly to respond to them. And with the data alert suite, which is one of the components that I'm demonstrating here, we can even take automated action. So if we detect something like this or something like a ransomware attack, we have the ability to kick off an action that could, for example, turn the machine off or disable the NIC or log the user out to prevent those behaviors. Jumping back to the dashboard quickly, that was a focus on the alerts and the threat detection section. But on the flip side of that, the data protection section, we have a number of different dashboards which give us really great high-level views of where our data is potentially at risk, and really helps us understand the places that we need to focus on and target. And we have them broken down into different platform sections. The file servers would consider for us any type of CIFS data store. So the CTERA file edge filers would appear here in this case. And we have a lot of different metrics to very quickly see, again, where we have data that might potentially be at risk or exposed. And up here on the top left, this I think is my favorite widget. What it shows is the sensitive data that Varonis has discovered in the organization, but not only that, where it's open to everybody. So we combine the classification information and the permissions information to get that risk prioritization view into the data. And in this case, 25% of my total data is open to potentially everyone. This is a huge amount of risk in the environment. And this is a place where a lot of people start when they're going down that data protection strategy. And behind the scenes here, of course, I can drill into any of this. I can take a look at the specific folders and the view there, and I can even track this metric over time. So if I'm going through a remediation process, for example, what I can do is make sure that I have a visualization to show that my trending graph should be hopefully going in the right direction over time as I take action to reduce and mitigate the risk. And we also have dashboards for some of the other platforms that we monitor: 365, SharePoint Online, Exchange Online, some of the on-prem edge telemetry, directory services. And then, of course, we have ones dedicated to some of our compliance packs as well here, too. And we have very similar information across all of these. Of course, you can drill down to any of these sections. The other part I'd like to show is really the behind the scenes. So that was a great visualization of all of the potential risks in the environment. So what I'm showing is the more advanced console for our solution. So right now we're looking at a CTERA Edge filer here, CorpFSO2. We also have some other platforms like SharePoint Online, Exchange Online, down below in OneDrive. So all of our monitoring platforms appear in one place together. And I've expanded this structure out. And what this allows me to do is really get into the weeds on any of this information. So looking over here, I talked about some of that risk prioritization. I have a breakdown of the total instances of sensitive data I found in all of these locations. I have it broken out by category. So if it's PCI, GDPR data, PAI, PHI data, I can see a very quick list of what I'm dealing with. And then the classification information here are the individual rules that have detected it. And then this last column is if any of that data has been labeled with Varonis at this point. So to learn a little bit more, what I can do is double click on any one of these folders to understand who has access to this data. So I'm going to double click on my legal folder here, and I can see that administrators and everyone has access. Now I can pick any one of these folders like HR, for example, and see that same type of view. into the data. So in my HR folder here, I have everyone, HR private, and a couple of nested groups here. Same with the finance folder. I'm able to get that view into the data sets and see what those permissions look like. But it just doesn't stop there. I can expand any of these groups out to see the members inside of them. So here are all of the members of group finance that have modify rights on my finance folder. I can do the same thing with my Sec IT systems down here and show the members directly inside, as well as any nested groups underneath these data sets also. And it's not just about mapping from data to users. I can do this bidirectionally. So I can pick any user or group in the environment and see where they have access across all of the platforms. So as the data grows, as we move it to different locations, being able to figure out who has access to what becomes increasingly difficult. So I'm going to double click on my friend Alan Carey, and what I'm going to see in just a second here is a color change. Folders in green mean Alan has access. Folders in yellow means he does not. So we're able to see all of these locations that have turned green where Alan has access, the level of rights he has, and then of course, where he's getting them from. I know he has access to this finance folder because he's a member here, but Alan has access to a number of these different folders from the global everyone group. And when I was showing the dashboard of the risk profile just a moment ago, where it showed the sensitive data exposed to everyone, this is exactly that type of query. So what I can do is search for everyone here. I want to see the folders and I want to see the rights where everyone has access. Simply search for that, double click. And what it's able to do is give me that visualization of where this everyone group has access across these data sets at this point. So these would be, in this case, the high risk folders. And here's my legal folder that we just looked at a moment ago I had shown you. In this case, everyone has access to all of the data in the legal folder. They have full control over that data, so they can do anything they want. They can create new data. They can delete new data. They can modify it, or they can take ownership. This is a location, because of the full control, that an attacker who compromised any account could potentially steal or encrypt if we're dealing with ransomware. In addition to that, it also contains a ton of sensitive information. So this shows a lot of risk. This is a huge risk factor in organizations that they would need to address. And of course, Varonis can help with that as well. So we're not just a reporting tool. We don't just tell you that there's something wrong and say, hey, figure it out. What we do is we help you take steps to lock that data down. So as I can see on my legal folder, I have this everyone access here. And what I'm going to do is run through just a really quick simulation, a what if scenario, to show you that we can, of course, take action on this. I've unfolded my right-hand panel here. Looks very similar to the left-hand panel, but this allows me to run that what if scenario. So on my legal folder, I can see that admins have access and then everyone. So really, either anybody in the company can get access to it or the administrators. Not an ideal situation, especially for a legal folder. And it's a legal folder containing a lot of sensitive information. If all of our viewers here, if your company is like our company, the last folks you probably want to tick off are the legal department. So one of the big challenges that people face is being able to take action on what they found without disrupting business. And that's exactly what I'm going to walk you through right here. So I have my legal folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to remove permissions. The little remove permissions had a little magic wand icon on it. So what I'm doing is I have not changed anything on the file server. I'm simply running a what if scenario. So based on the information that Varonis collected and the auditing event that we've pulled off the CTERA filer, we can see we're going to see what happens if I do this. So this is a desired state. I'd like to remove everyone. Over here's the actual state. So what I'm going to do is run this process. It's going to look at who has access and how they're accessing the data. And it's going to tell me if anybody would be affected by this change. And of course, knowing the legal team and how busy they typically are, absolutely some people will be affected by this change. So I want to get a list of those folks over here. And it's going to go back through and look at our database of our events on the back end to be able to do this and map it through the permissions group. Cool. And then over here, I've changed to my access errors section. So these are all the people that would lose access if I were to remove this everyone group. Because as we see here on the ACL, it's only admins and everyone. So unless you're an administrator, you're going to have a problem here retaining access if I were to make this change. And of course, I can see all of my users here. I'm going to ungroup all of these guys here and just look at a flat list. So then what I can see are, again, the users who have been accessing data, the current level of rights they have, and then, of course, what level of rights that we would potentially recommend here as well. So based on their access activity, we can say, hey, these people should probably go into a regroup on this legal folder. And of course, if you wanted to do that, we can continue the simulation by creating the group, putting the members in it, and then eventually committing it back to the actual file system once we're assured that we're not going to disrupt business with this process. So that's really kind of just a quick high-level overview of not only how we would show the potential risks and investigate when something happens if there was a potential cyber attack, we also demonstrate how we can reduce that blast radius. So showing you where you have data, where it might be at risk, and of course, taking action on that to lock that down and secure the data. So with that, we've about 9 minutes left for questions. So let's go ahead and jump into that. Give us plenty of time. We got some good ones.
Yeah, that was an excellent demonstration. Thank you, Killian. We do have one question that came in while you were speaking that maybe we can tackle right now in the midst of other questions that came in. But this is a question about your specific demo. They're wondering if the tool can show where Varonis, if Varonis admin has lost access. Someone might have changed or locked an admin out. Does your service provide alerts on that as well?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting. It's a bit of a deep cut for questions, but yes, in cases where file systems have been around for a while, and especially if end users have like full control where they can change permissions, there are instances where, a lot of instances, unfortunately, where the permissions have been changed, where admins lose access and the backup can't run and things like that potentially. So we do have abilities to run reports to find where admins don't have access to file system data. So that's a great question. It's a pretty good one. Sounds like maybe that particular user's run into that challenge, so we can absolutely help.
Okay, great. So we do have a few more minutes, not a ton of time, but if you do have a quick question, you want to pop it into the Q&A, feel free to do so. Meantime, I just want to let folks know how they can get more information, get started, learn more about the CTERA Varonis integration. You can go to either of our websites. For CTERA at CTERA.com/Varonis, and we've got a webpage where you can learn a lot more, download a solution brief, get a lot more information. And similarly, you can visit Varonis.com/technology partners on the Varonis side to get more information there. We do offer CTERA. We do offer a free demo and a free trial of the platform. So really up to you. You can come into the site, come into CTERA.com, register for a live demo, get one of our solutions experts to give you a walkthrough. We also offer you the ability to start a free trial and tinker with the platform on your own. So visit CTERA.com to learn more about that. Go to Varonis.com, obviously, to learn more about the Varonis Data Security Platform and everything that Killian described today. If you are an existing CTERA customer, you want to know more about integrating Varonis into your platform today, do encourage you to reach out to your account contact, your AE contact, for more information around that. All right, so we've got a couple minutes here. I will see if we can get some questions. I'm checking that right now. Meanwhile, Simon and Killian, thanks so much for your time today. This is a really informative webinar. Okay, we have someone who joined late. Yeah, so if you join later, if you want to rewatch this broadcast, it is being recorded. We will be sending a link to all attendees, all registrants really, in the next 24 hours, so you can review and see anything that you did miss. Okay. Let's see. Killian, looks like a question for you. Is there a rule of thumb with regard to how much capacity is used by Varonis in relation to the user data that's analyzed?
That's a great question. Really the deciding factor more than anything else is not necessarily the amount of storage that we're monitoring, it's the amount of auditing that we're collecting. So of course, we're collecting all the auditing from all these different platforms. And that really is the biggest factor in deciding the storage size. Off the top of my head, I forget what the current rule or metric is, but suffice it to say, through the process that we use, through our eval process and working with our teams, what we'll do is we'll give you a recommendation for that. So we'll look at the number of users you have. During a POC, we'll look at the amount of data access you have, and we'll give you an idea of that. So we call it a sizing exercise as part of our standard procedure. We can actually help craft one of those up.
Okay, thanks. Kelly, another question for you. Which Varonis products today are included in the CTERA integration?
That's another great question. So it would be our core data advantage platform. So we call it really data advantage for CIFs in this case that we're looking at, the data classification engine for us. So that would go out and scan for the sensitive information. And then the data alert suite is the alerting engine behind the scenes. So data advantage would collect the audit event. It would do the permissions information and mapping that telemetry together. And then data alert would sit on top of that, analyze the auditing events, and then alert.
Perfect. Thanks, Killian. Simon, one question for you here. I think we can give this one to you. Which file protocols, I assume, does the Varonis collector support within the CTERA platform today?
Sure. So our implementation and the context of the integration with Varonis, that was implemented on CIFs, SMB versions 1 all the way to 3.1. This is the file access protocol that we started with. Perhaps in the future, we'll also expand that towards NFS. Okay.
Got it. Thanks, Simon. Okay, we've got time for one more question. So I'm going to give one more to you, Killian, and then you're off the hook for the day. Question is, I might have missed it on the demo, but can Varonis change the security on folders and files from the GUI? Thanks in advance.
Well, you're welcome in advance. I'll shout it out, Mark, in this case. Yes, absolutely, we can. At the very end of this, I had walked through a bit of that simulation process. We can take that all the way to the end of the line by committing that change back to the file system. We always like to mock it up first to understand what would happen if we make any change. That way, as we're securing things or changing the permissions, we don't adversely affect anybody. But yes, we can take it all the way to the end and then commit that change back to the file system.
Perfect. All right. That's all the time we have for today for questions. I know we have others that we didn't have time to get to live, but we will be following up with these questions via email. So if you did ask one, we will get back to you in the next 24 to 48 hours as we get the recordings and send out our emails and follow up with you all. So if you do have other questions, though, feel free to reach out to, we've got the contact information here for our two experts, Simon and Killian. Feel free to reach out to them. You can also reach out to info@ctera.com with any questions, and visit ctera.com as well for any other information on getting started with CTERA and Varonis. So thank you very much for everyone for joining. And Killian and Simon, thank you for a really great presentation. We really appreciate it. So thanks, everybody. Hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.